So we're going to be learning a mimer, which is a very famous mimer, very important mimer, and we'll talk more about it. The mimer is called Echolzu. And before we do that mimer, we're just going to take a day or two in the morning to explain Sefiras Haomer according to Chassidus. Just like we do with all the Yom Tovim. So here we have a mitzvah that's in some ways different than many other things. It's for a long time, 49 days. Every single day we're observing this mitzvah. So we're going to talk about what is the Hasidic explanation to Sefiras Haomer. And of course, like everything else, there's a lot of Maimarim, each Rebbe in his generation. But we're just going to give you just some general ideas, cover some of the general subjects to have some idea. What I'm giving out now is in writing, but I asked Mrs. Yaffe, she'll be typing it up, so you'll have the words in type. These are all words and terms and psukim, phrases, quotes that are related to Sefiras Haomer. So first, let's look at the sheet on the Hebrew side, where it talks about the counting of the Omer. And this is the source. It's Pashas Emer, a Pasha which we'll be reading in a few weeks. And it says, "Svartem lachem imachras haShabbos." You will count from the day after Shabbos. V'yem haviachem es omer hatnufa. You'll start from the day that you bring the carbon, the sacrifice, which is called Omer. And what should you count? Sheva Shabbosais Tmimos Tiyena. You'll count 7 complete weeks. And how long will you count it? Ad mimochras haShabbos haShviyos. You'll count until after the 7th week. Altogether, you'll be counting Tisperu Chamishim Yom, 50 days. They craft them, and you'll bring Mincha Chadosha, a new sacrifice. Mincha, which means not a sacrifice of an animal, but sacrifice of plant. Kingdom, which is from things that grow. And that's what you'll bring. And that's Shavuos. So, first of all, what's the simple story? What is this counting all about? So the simple explanation is that when Yidden went out of Mitzrayim, Moshe Rabbeinu told them the purpose of you going out of Mitzrayim is because in 50 days we'll be receiving the Torah at Har Sinai. And they were very excited about receiving the Torah. And they were so excited that they actually began to count the days, because every day they were full of anticipation for Matan Torah. And therefore, we have the custom that we too, not the custom, but it's a mitzvah that we too count the days from Pesach till Shavuos to commemorate the fact that the Yidden of that generation counted the days from Pesach to Shavuos. However, in Chassidus, it explains that it's much deeper than that. In general, it's never just commemoration, but it's something that's happening now. So Chassidus explains that it's part of a process of self-refinement, preparing for Matan Torah. In fact, in the Zohar, it says, so here I just will call your attention to the sheet with the writing on it, with the list. So on top of the page, it says, "Svartem lachem," and you should count. You should count 7 weeks. Right next to it says, "V'sofra lo," and she will count. So the Zohar says that the Torah says there's a mitzvah for a woman to count 7 days where she's clean before she could be with her husband. So too, we are entering a marriage with Hashem. Hashem is the chassan, we're the kala. Matan Torah is the marriage date. So just like the woman counts 7 days, we count the 7 weeks to purify ourselves, to cleanse ourselves, to be prepared for Matan Torah. So we see that the Indian of counting is part of a process of preparation and self-refinement and cleansing, a spiritual cleansing, that we should be ready for Matan Torah. In fact, there's also another thing that's found in Chassidus, is that the word Sfarta, which literally means counting, has another meaning. And the other meaning is, why are Sefiras called Sefiras? Because it's 10 lights. And the word Sfira comes from the word light, like Evan Sapir. In English, it's also called a sapphire stone, which means something that's bright, that shines. So Sfarta Lechem means you should shine, you should bring out the light within yourself. You should shine yourself, which means self-refinement, a spiritual self-refinement as a preparation for Matan Torah. So there are a number of questions here, and once we understand the whole idea better, all these questions will be answered and fall into place. One question is, if we're refining ourselves for Matan Torah, then why 7 weeks? Why not 10 weeks? There are 10 spheres. Shouldn't we be refining every one of the 10 spheres? Another question is, of course, the 7 weeks correspond to the 7 emotional attributes, the 7 midos, but there are a lot of things in Torah that they also correspond to the 7 emotional attributes, and in those cases, it's number 7, not 49. A man puts on tefillin, so he wraps the straps around 7 times, corresponding to the 7 midos. Why doesn't he wrap it around 49 times? And don't tell me there's not enough space on the hand, because we have 2 hands to wrap around our head. We'll find a way of doing it. As you know, at a wedding, the kala circles the chassan, according to many customs, Chabad custom, 7 times. On Simchas Torah, we circle the bima with the Torah scroll 7 times. The menorah in the Beis Hamikdash had 7 branches. During Sukkot, when we go around with the lulav and the esrog, we walk around the bima. It's also 7 times. On Hoshana Rabbah, we do it all together 7 days. So here we say, because there's 7 emotional attributes, therefore 7 times. And here we say, because it's 7 emotional attributes, we do it 49 times. Of course, the reason is because each one of the 7 includes in it all the other 7. And 7 times 7 is 49. But that doesn't explain why here do we do 49 and go to the details, and in other areas we just say 7 is enough. Another question is, we just read in the Chumash, and you should count 50 days. We don't count 50 days, we count 49 days. So the Gemara, which is a Torah Shabbat, the oral Torah, which explains the written Torah, explains and gives the source and the reason why we know that it's not 50, but it's 50 minus 1. So if it's 50 minus 1, why doesn't it say 49? Why does it have to say 50? And then we need a special source to teach us that 50 is not 50, but it's 50 minus 1. It does say count 50 days. Another question we try to explain is, we know that these days, the days between Pesach and Shavuos, is also a time of mourning. And there are halachic ramifications. We don't make weddings during this time. And there are a lot of other halachas. Hopefully the halacha teachers will go into what those halachas are. But it's not as severe as the 3 weeks in the summer before Tisha B'Av, but there are also halachas of mourning. So the reason for that is because during these 7 weeks, there was an incident with Rabbi Akiva's students. He had 24,000 students. They were great giants of Torah, but because they were lacking in the way they respected one another, a plague broke out. And Dafka in this unit of time, these 7 weeks, the 24,000 students unfortunately died out. It was a big tragedy for the whole Jewish nation. And the question is, there must be a connection. Why did that happen, Dafka, during these 7 weeks? What is the connection between Sefiras Haomer and the story of Rabbi Akiva students? And I guess we can also put into this that is another custom during these days, also universal, that you study Pirkei Avos these weeks between Pesach and Shavuos. We know that there's another custom, and for many years we didn't see this custom in Chabad. I'm not sure what year it started, it was somewhere in the 1970s. And the Rebbe said that being that there's another opinion, that we learn Pirkei Avos not only between Pesach and Shavuos, but we continue from Shavuos until Rosh Hashanah, we should keep that custom as well. But the custom which is universal, and everyone in all Jewish communities follow this custom, is to study Pirkei Avos Dafka in these 7 weeks, the same time as the counting of the Omer, the same time the students of Rabbi Akiva. What is the connection to that? So, to answer the question, so first of all, again, this is not just to commemorate what happened then, but we know when Shavuos is going to come up, just like with Pesach, we learned that it wasn't just remembering and commemorating thousands of years the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim, but spiritually, the light that was shining then is shining now, and we're experiencing Mitzrayim now. So too with Shavuos, that when Shavuos comes, we're not just celebrating something that happened over 3,000 years ago, but we're actually going to be celebrating and experiencing Matan Torah once again. And in fact, when we experience Matan Torah now, in some ways it'll even be greater than before, because by now it's over 3,300 times more than the first time. The first time Hashem's light shined into the world. The second time, the third time, the fourth time, every time it shines again, in a certain way, it's even brighter and greater than the first. The only difference is there's no manifestation here in the physical world. So therefore, whatever the idea is of preparing applies now, that counting the Omer is a spiritual preparation for Matan Torah. So in order to understand this better, first it's necessary to give this introduction that Shavuos and Pesach in some ways are not two separate holidays. Of course, we know there are 3 holidays every year, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. And Shavuos is so many weeks away. But in a certain way, it's not a new holiday, it's an extension and a culmination of Pesach. And how do we know this? Actually in halacha, not just in Chassidus, because the halacha is, as you probably all know, that Shavuos is the only yontif that there's no day in the calendar for Shavuos. Every single yontif, there's a day. Pesach is the 15th of Nisan, and Sukkot is the 15th of Tishrei. Rosh Hashanah is the 1st of Tishrei. Yom Kippur is the 10th of Tishrei. Purim is the 14th of Adar. Chanukah is the 25th of Kislev. The only single yontif that has no date is Shavuos. But it does have a date. It's on the calendar. No, the real time for Shavuos is not the date on the calendar, but it's the 50th day from Pesach. From the counting from Pesach, count the Omer on the 50th day, that's Shavuos. And this is a halacha that applies now as well, because if anyone would be traveling from here to a place which they have to cross the date line, they're going to Australia or countries that are similar to Australia, they would count not according to what's happening in that country, but according to their 50th day. So if you go from America to Australia, you're missing a day. When you get there, you've only counted 48 days, and they've already counted 49 days. You have to observe Shavuos, according to some opinions, that's the Rebbe's opinion. You have to observe Shavuos on your 50th day, not the whole community is having Shavuos one day, and you're having Shavuos a different day. If you come from Australia to America, the same thing. When you come from Australia to America, you have the same day twice. So by the time you get here, you're up to your 50th day, a day before Shavuos. You have to observe Shavuos a day before. And when Shavuos comes around, the second day, it's not Yontiv anymore for you. And halachically, you're allowed to even do malacha. You're just not allowed to do it publicly. There's the only yontif like that. Why? Because it's established not by the day of the month, by the 50th day from Pesach. Why is that? Because Shavuos is really the end of Pesach in a sense. So how does Chassidus explain that? This came up many times. We'll say it again. That being that we compare Shavuos to the marriage of Hashem and Bnei Yisrael, so just like in a marriage, in the physical sense, there are two stages. One stage is Erusin, and the other stage is Nisuin, which means the first stage is when the husband or the chassan gives the wife the ring. They become halachically married. The way it was years ago, in the times of Gemara, still was that they would do this process. They were considered married, but they didn't live together as husband and wife until a year later. And for that year, they would just do whatever they needed to do to prepare for their marriage. And a year later, that was just giving the ring with two witnesses. A year later, they would go under the chuppah, do the Sheva brachas, then the yichud after the chuppah, and that's when they were considered fully married to live together as husband and wife. So the first stage is kiddushin, that's what it's called, and the second stage is nisuyin, that's the chuppah. So the Medrash, it says that when the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim and then received the Torah, these are the two stages. Going out of Mitzrayim is like the Kedushin. That was the beginning stage, stage one. And then came the going to Matan Torah is the final culmination of this process of marriage, and the marriage is complete on the day of Shavuos. So what are the 7 weeks in between? That's our preparation. The husband and wife, they would prepare a year before marriage. Now, the reason why we do it differently is because the Gemara came to a certain point where people were not the way they used to be. Their standards of Yirah Shamayim, of fear of Hashem, became lower. And to be in such a state where halachically they're married, but they're still not living together, husband and wife, was spiritually a danger zone because they're not yet married, but they have all the stringencies of a married couple regarding relationship with other people. So therefore, the Chachamim said to do everything together. So under the chuppah, even though you see that they give the ring, and then they do the Sheva brachas, and then they do the yichud, but these are really two separate processes, and they happen together for that reason. So, what?
I was just wondering if you'd be willing to talk just for a second about Pesach Sheni and why Pesach Sheni is a month after and what we do for it, and if that does that have anything to do with Shavuot or the 50 days at all, or no?
Good question. I have to confess that I never thought about that question. You're the first one to bring it up. So I probably have to think what the answer is. But before I think what the answer is, it's probably, without a question, it's probably part of the process of preparation as well. Because what Pesach Sheni means is if I didn't do what I'm obligated to do the first Pesach, so I'm doing it the second Pesach. But I guess being that the community as a whole starts counting with Pesach, so therefore, and even this person who didn't bring the sacrifice, they still had to observe Pesach. They weren't allowed to do Malacha. The only thing they couldn't do was bring the Korban Pesach. But everything else they were able to do even on the first Pesach. So I guess in terms of the 50 days, it still goes from the first Pesach. And this one part, which is part of the process, eating the Korban Pesach, that they had to make up in Pesach Sheni. But give it a little bit more thought and maybe look around to see if there's any source that talks about it. So we could look at these 7 weeks as a bridge. There's Pesach, there's Shavuos, and the 7 weeks is the bridge that connects Pesach to Shavuos. Why do we need the connection? And before we go into that, I want to bring up another thing in the sheet that I gave out, which has the pasuk in Chumash. I underlined the Rashi. I don't have the Rashi in English, but I'll tell you what Rashi says. When it says they have to bring a mincha, which is a carbon, but not from an animal, but from grain, Rashi says that this mincha was different than others. All others were brought from chitim, which is wheat. This was brought from Saorim, which is barley. And the Gemara says, what is the difference between chitim and Saorim? Chitim, wheat, is considered basically human food. And barley is more the food for animals. So why is it that Sefiras Haomer, specifically the carbon is from barley, different than all the carbonas? So this is the way Chassidus explains it. Again, this is the general explanation. When the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim, one of the main factors of our going out of Mitzrayim was that we were chased out and we went out in haste. It wasn't just part of the story, it's a main part of the story. First of all, we know this from the matzah. The reason why we eat matzah is to remember that the Yidden ran out of Mitzrayim so quick that there wasn't any time for the dough to rise. So if you think of it, the mitzvah of the day, this is the main mitzvah that defines and sort of expresses the celebration of Pesach, is all about the fact that we ran out of Mitzrayim so fast there was no time for the matzah, for the dough to rise. And it says in Chumash, Sefiras Haomer, they ran away from Egypt. And it's so significant that in the prophecy regarding Mashiach, it says, one of the things that it talks about, the ties of Mashiach is a pasuk where it says, I don't know if I wrote this down, Kiloi b'menusun telechun. I don't know if I put this down on my list. Let me see. Yeah, number 8 and number 9. Number 8 are the words that are on Chumash when it comes to Pesach. Sefiras Haomer. Paro was told that the people of Israel ran away. Number 9 are the words that are found in reference to Mashiach. Loi b'menuchsan telechun. You won't go out of Golus in haste. You go out calmly and slowly. Now we all understand that if you're traveling somewhere, you'd rather travel calmly and slowly than in haste and sort of panic and you can't concentrate on what you're doing and you forget taking what you need to take along. It's much better if you're going calmly and slowly. But is it such a major thing? There has to be a prophecy to say you won't be running out of Egypt, you'll be walking out of this Golus, and you'll be walking calmly. What's the big deal? The main thing is get out of Golus. We want Mashiach now. We run, I'm walking, whichever way, I'll fly, run, drag me, just get me out of this Golus. So this is the way the Alter Rebbe explains this in Tanya. The Alter Rebbe says the following, and once we understand this, we'll understand what Sefiras Haomer is all about. We know that when the Yidden were in Mitzrayim, even when they went out of Egypt, they were still in a very low place spiritually. In fact, they were in the 49th gate of Tumah, of impurity. And not only that, but had they been in Egypt another moment, they were not just 49th gate, they were 49th gate, and they were in the place where they were borderline 50. Had they sunk to the 50th gate of impurity, it would have been impurity beyond return. That would have been so low that there's no way they can get. So Hashem took them out before they reached the 50th gate. But clearly, spiritually, they were not so fit. Not only not so fit, but it's considered a place of impurity that we never again were in such a place in history. Yet what they experienced in terms of Hashem revealing himself was the exact opposite. The whole experience of going out of Mitzrayim, they saw godliness in such a revealed way that never again in history did Yidden ever experience such a thing. The next time we'll have such a revelation of godliness is when Mashiach comes. In fact, it says, when the sea splits, says the word Zeh Keli Vanveyo. This is my God. And the Gemara says you can't use the word Zeh in Hebrew unless it's something you can point to, something you can see. This is. And this implies that at that moment they saw Hashem openly. Not only that, but the prophetic vision that they had to see godliness was so amazing and so great that what they saw was greater than the greatest of prophets in the future saw. They saw more than that. So on one hand, they were in the lowest place spiritually. On the other hand, they saw the highest levels of revelation of godliness. We know that in order to be a Navi, you have to be a tzaddik. A tzaddik that has no averus and you're on a very high level. Not every person could be a navi. I remember I once had this discussion with someone. It was a college young man that happened to wander into 770 and started having a discussion, talking. I was a bacher in yeshiva, and he is telling me that he has his own religion of sorts. And he told me what his religion and what he believes on. I tell him, but you're a Jew. Do you know about the Jewish religion? He doesn't know much. We start having a conversation. And he tells me his philosophy. And even though I was a bacher then, I didn't have all this experience, but whatever, I asked him some questions and things, and he was stuck. He didn't have answers. So I said, being that you don't have answers, I think you should, if you're an honest person, you should give up your philosophy and ideology and just embrace Yiddishkeit and Torah, because you're wrong. You have no answer to the question. I have no answer, but I know I'm right. Now that's not being logical. I know I'm right. I kept on saying, but how do you know you're right? Finally said, well, God spoke to me. And he told me that I'm right. At that point, I realized at no point in continuing the conversation, he speaks to God himself. I don't think he was at a point that I could explain to him that God doesn't just speak to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. You have to be on a level to be able to have Hashem reveal himself to you. I mean, how the Rambam describes, even the great tzaddikim, they're not necessarily a navi, to have prophecy, to see godliness openly. These were exceptional tzaddikim. So how is it that Eden was so low, the lowest of the lowest, and they had the highest revelation of godliness? So the answer is, it really wasn't as a reward for their avodah. It wasn't a result of their hard labor. This was just a gift from above. And in fact, if you remember before Pesach, we explained that's the deeper meaning why it's called Pesach. Hashem jumped. He jumped over the rules. He jumped over all the order. The normal order is as much as I refine myself, that's how much I could receive. Like think of it intellectually. If you're listening to a shir, a Torah class, or really in any subject, whether it be math, or science, or any other subject, medicine, if someone's giving a lecture on a subject, which is an intellectual subject, how good will you be able to understand the subject, depending on your background knowledge. If you have a little bit of knowledge, you'll understand it a little bit. If you have more knowledge, you'll understand it better. If you're very well in this field, in this subject, you'll understand it even better. Depends on how much you know. So it's the same thing with spiritually. How much spirituality is revealed to a person according to how much they did this process of self-refinement. Over here, it wasn't anything to do with our self-refinement. It was coming from Hashem. And as the words are found in the Haggadah, Nigla Aleihem Melech Malchi Hamlochem HaKadosh Baruch Hu V'Golam. Hashem, the King of Kings, revealed himself to them. He revealed himself to them because of his benevolence, because of his kindness, and he took us out of the 49 gates of impurity. But it wasn't really because of our avodah. So Hashem revealed himself, and through that we were lifted to an extremely high level, and we were ready to receive the Torah. When Hashem reveals himself and a person becomes inspired, which part of me becomes inspired? Is it the Nefesh Elokis or the Nefesh Bahamis? Right, because the Nefesh Bahamis doesn't respond to godly revelations. To speak about this in simpler terms, if someone goes to a Shabbos table, someone goes and meets the Rebbe, someone travels to Israel and goes to the Kotel, and they get very inspired, get very excited, and they actually say, I really want to identify more with my Judaism, and I want to start davening, I want to do something, I want to become more part of it. Who got excited? Was it the Nefesh Elokis or the Nefesh Bahamis? The answer is Nefesh Elokis, because the Nefesh Bahamis understands tomatoes and spaghetti and meatballs, but doesn't understand godly revelation. It's not that it doesn't get inspired, it doesn't even relate to it. It doesn't connect to it. Like we gave this mashal in the other Maimon we were learning, that when there are signals from a satellite, so if you have the right device, it responds, and your computer or your iPhone is working. But if I'll pick up this, and I'm saying, that, are there any signals in this room? Nothing's happening, I don't see anything, I don't feel anything. Well, you won't, because this is not designed to pick up those signals. That's how a behemoth can't pick up any godly signals. A behemoth and godly signals are not connected, two different worlds. So when they got inspired and they were lifted spiritually, it was the godly soul that was lifted, but not the animal soul. But the animal soul was not interfering because the godly soul was so lifted, was so high, was so inspired that the godly soul just was swept away with the excitement. The thing of a person who was in a place where everyone around them is happy or excited or inspired, and their inspiration inspires you, it's not really coming from you, is the inspiration of the other people inspires me. Like the mush we always give, that if there's a wind blowing and there's a piece of paper, the wind carries the paper and brings the paper, blows the paper fast and high, it goes on top of the entire state building, but the paper itself never became a flying object. It's just flying because it's swept away with the wind. So the Nefesh of Bahamas is swept away with the godly soul, but it didn't really change in any way. Because Hashem wanted us to be fully prepared for the Torah, so therefore, he said, now you have 7 weeks, and during these 7 weeks, what you need to do is work on your animal soul. The godly soul is there already. It was inspired by Hashem. But the animal soul is not part of the experience. So you have 7 weeks to refine and transform your animal soul. Each week, work on another one of the 7 emotional attributes, and that's how you'll transform the animal soul. So when you come to receive the Torah, it'll be my godly soul and my animal soul both be part of it. So it means that these 7 weeks are mainly and primarily designated to refine the animal soul. And that explains why it's 7, not 10. Yes?
It took so many years for the Eden to go down to the 49 gate, right? So how come it's just like taking days to just platform there?
A miracle. That was part of the miracle. Right. Yeah.
So I'm sure there's an answer to this question. I know.
Yeah, you're right. There is an answer. Oh, you want to know what the answer is? Okay.
Yeah, I do want to know what the answer is because.
And let me first hear what the question is.
The day after Matan Torah, I mean, we did the golden calf. So did it really work? Yeah. That's the answer.
Like, did it really work on it, or is it like from Hashem? It's coming from Hashem that's like refining the animal soul. Like, how can you?
No, it's true. Even the refining of the animal soul then was still coming more from Hashem. It was a miraculous time. Don't forget, they still saw godliness open. They had the cloud surrounded, man falling from Shemayim. Believe me, if we have man falling from Shemayim now, and we have clouds surrounding us, and we have a well that travels along with us, and all these miracles happening, there'd be much more people studying in Mechon Yadus right now. Guaranteed. So obviously, it was still from above. And that's probably the reason why they did the Egel Azov, because they still wasn't 100% refined. True, it wasn't 100%, but it was much more than it was when they went out of Mitzrayim. So it means to a certain extent, their animal soul was prepared, but it wasn't through and through. Don't forget that, but even by the Egel Azov, it doesn't say every single Jew committed this sin. There were those that committed, and unfortunately, everyone had to suffer for them. And the Levium not even one of them committed the sin of the golden calf. So it means it helped to some degree, but not 100%.
Neither did the women.
What?
Neither did the women.
And the women, yeah, okay, I give up, yeah. So how does this explain why 7, why not 10? So the answer is, it says in Tanya, there's a chapter in Tanya, chapter 9, where the Alter Rebbe talks about where is the location of the godly soul in the body, and where is the location of the animal soul in the body. And the Alter Rebbe explains that the godly soul is located in the brain, and also in the heart, but mainly in the brain. And the animal soul is mainly in the heart. And that has to do with the nature and the characteristics of the both. The fact that the godly soul is mainly in the brain and the animal soul in the heart characterizes who they are, what the difference is. The godly soul is mainly intellect. Of course, it's enhanced by the emotion, but all the emotion is based on the intellect, comes from the intellect, is inspired by the intellect, and that's what guides the life of an animal, of a godly soul, is to do what's right, to do what's true, to do what's godly, the way the godly soul understands. An animal, I mean, this is the difference, let's say, begashmi, between a human being and an animal. Humans have intellect and emotion, and animals have intellect and emotion. Animals also have a certain degree of intellect, but an animal is primarily emotion, and even the intellect that an animal displays, it's sort of part of the emotion. Like where do we find intellect by animals? It's always in connection to their emotional pursuits. You find the intellect, how the animal thinks of ways to get food, how the animal thinks of ways to escape a hunter, to escape another animal, how an animal protects itself. So the animal's intellect is always related to something emotional. It has an emotional pursuit, and how the intellect is, how can I get what I want emotionally? A human being is primarily an intellectual being, and of course, the fact that there's emotion, there's warmth, and there's feeling, all these things enhance the life of this intellectual being. But the life is governed by intellect. That's what it's supposed to be. So therefore, this is the difference between Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Bahamis. And Nefesh Bahamis is an animal soul, is primarily motivated by emotion, goes by what it wants. Even though we see people that live a life of an animal soul and they're intelligent, but their intelligence, unfortunately, is just there to serve their emotion and to enhance their emotion. How could they pursue and achieve their emotional goals? That's what it's all about. And they'll do things which are not logical and don't make any sense, and things that they're hurting themselves or hurting their families, or they're lowering their standards, but they don't care. They just want pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. That's the Nefesh Bahamis. Nefesh Elokis is intellect. So therefore, the reason why it's 7 weeks, not 10 weeks, is being that the whole purpose is to transform the animal soul. The animal soul is mainly and primarily characterized by the 7 midos. And that's why all that's necessary here is 7 weeks. So far, are you following me? Okay, so this explains one of the questions. Why is the carbon from barley, not from wheat? What do we say the difference is? Wheat is Michael Adam, that's food for humans, and barley is food for animals. Being that here, the point is to transform the animal soul, that's why it's barley. But we still didn't explain, so why is it 49 days? Why not 7 days? Why do we go into 7 weeks? Because each day needs 7 times 7 is 49. Why not just 7 days? And how's it connected to Rabbi Akiva? So this is connected to another point, which we'll start explaining now. We'll probably have to complete the subject tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem. And in fact, the Maimah we're going to learn, which is Hecholzu, is a Maimah that actually elaborates on this subject at length. This would probably be the source if anyone would want to have a better understanding of this subject, why the midas are 49, not just 7. That would be the Maimah to learn, almost more than any other Maimah. Another thing which we'll explain, which I didn't raise the question before, but what does it mean when we talk about the Sefiras, that you have Chesed Shebechesed, Gvura Shebechesed? I mean, for example, today is Gvura Shebegvura. Gvura Shebegvura makes sense. But what's Gvura Shebechesed? Is it Chesed or is it Gvura? If it's Gvura, then it's not Chesed. If it's Chesed, it's not Gvura. So, and how do we sort of define when we say there's 2 things there? So how do you know it's Gvura Shebechesed? Maybe it's Chesed Shebegvura. How do you describe what's the way to what's the principle behind it when we say Gvura Shebechesed, Netzach Shebechesed, Gvura Shebegvura, tomorrow will be Sefiras Shebegvura? How does this work? So Bli Neder will explain it, but the general concept is on the sheet that I gave you. If you look at number, it's on the bottom. Oh, you can't see it. It's over here. It's supposed to be on the sheet. The word is hiskalos. Hiskalos means inclusion. Inclusion means that the spheres include each other. That is the key difference between midas of kedusha and midas of klipa. Midas of kedusha include one another, and midas of klipa are separate one from the other. Each midah is separate unit. And therefore, because the whole point here is to elevate the midas and transform them from klipa to kedusha, that's why we're emphasizing the fact that each midah includes all the other midas. To be continued tomorrow. We're going to add the word as follows. Okay.